Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, welcome. Thank you again for joining us. It's episode 6 of the first season of Let's Talk Security. It is, in fact, the final episode of this season. I know I had teased you earlier on in the season that I may have a surprise 7th episode with an as yet unconfirmed guest. Unfortunately, she can't make it for very, very understandable reasons. I hope very much that she'll be able to join us in season 2, because my producers and the network have assured me that our season, our show will be renewed for a second season, because apparently it's gone over really well and you people are really enjoying it. Once again, I'm grateful for your presence with us. Please feel free to use all the opportunities afforded you by social media. We are broadcasting live, so the comments are there for you on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, for you to jump in and ask your questions. We have, for the season finale, we have a really fantastic guest for you today. If you've seen any of the tweets or posts promoting the show, you will know that guest today is Jake Williams. Jake has a long and storied history. He's worked in defense, he's worked in national security, he's worked in forensics, incident response, penetration testing, and Jake's area of specialization, I guess, over and above all of that, and he'll correct me if I get this totally wrong, but from an outside position looking in, it looks like Jake's area of expertise is really all about thinking like the hacker. That's why I decided to call this episode Become the Hunter. If you want to stop being hunted, the best thing you can do is become the hunter, and there is no one better to talk to us about that mental shift that's required than Jake Williams. Jake, how you doing?
I'm doing outstanding. How about yourself?
I'm all right. I just kind of dropped you straight in the stream there.
I know.
You were even looking off to one side thinking, when is Ferguson going to shut up?
Well, no, I've got this nice multi-monitor setup. It wasn't that I'm looking off to one side or whatever. It was I was looking at you. Now I'm looking at the camera, right? Kind of thing.
Okay, that's probably much prettier to look at the camera.
Yeah. I'm always with that whole, like, where does the screen get positioned versus the camera? It's the curse of the multi-monitor, right?
So I'm gonna drop you right in it straight away. What's that little plaque behind you?
That's actually something I got many years ago. I used to do a bunch of military work. I say used to do. I was in the military for a number of years. I was a paratrooper, did actual tactical work, and it's something that somebody got me a number of years ago around that. So.
It's Jake might play down some of his military and national security experience, some of it for reasons that he has to. But you told me a couple of amazing injuries when we had a conversation a couple of days ago. Injuries that really made me wince, particularly the story about breaking your ankle, or was it both ankles?
No, I just broke the one ankle. It was pretty nasty. Yeah, I popped all 3 bones that kind of come together, and yeah, it's didn't have a chance to get it set properly, I guess is the right way to say it. And so it's been a lifelong that's been a lifelong fun, right? So, but thank goodness the VA is here to help, right? So,
you had to walk on it. You had to stick with it for quite a long time before you got it treated, right?
Yeah, a few days. Yeah, so long enough out of the window where they normally like to set, that kind of stuff, right? So, which has caused a bunch of complications there as well. So I probably should have operated on it. Didn't, the deal, right? So yeah.
So I don't know the deal at all. That's why I'm sitting here wincing. I can't even imagine. I can't even begin to imagine what that's like. Thank you for your service, and thank you to anyone who has served, who may be watching live or on the rebroadcast of this. Sincerely, thank you.
Thank you.
Jake, one of the things, if I read any bios of you, and in fact, if I look at the Rendition page as well, Rendition is a company that you set up, right? You're the president and founder of Rendition. Yep. When was that, by the way? How long ago?
It was 2013, right? So 2013 is when we started, and it was the same year I left the agency, or National Security Agency, right? So, but yeah, so that, so gosh, 7 years now. It feels like not that long ago, but it's been,
So it's been a crazy ride. I know you've been involved in a whole bunch of things throughout that time, notwithstanding all the stuff that you did before, much of which I'm sure you can't talk about.
Right.
One of the things that I noticed kind of was common across different bios and different sites, because you do the rendition stuff, you do the sans stuff, you do you've just come straight here from another webinar that you were doing before this, so you're a man in demand. And obviously there's a lot of descriptions of you all over the place, and one of the things I noticed that was they all kind of had in common was this phrase called adversary emulation, and that's kind of one of your specialities. What is that?
Well, we and I don't want to start a holy war here about like what is a red team versus a pen test versus a vuln scan versus everybody has opinions about all that, and it's the kind of thing that it's not worth fighting on. But I'll say that one of the places that I think we drop the ball a lot in security is that, or at least in the offensive security side, is that we are not acting like an adversary, right? We're handing tools to a pen tester and saying, hey, go hack stuff, right? Go get domain admin, right? And it's like, stop focusing on domain admin, right? In fact, I did a talk about this last week with SANS even for their Hackfest, and it's all about act like the adversary, right? Start focusing on the things that the adversary focuses on, right?
So
an adversary. Oh, sorry.
If it's not domain admin, what is it then? What the adversary is focusing on, or maybe there's lots of different things.
Sure. I mean, domain admin is just a means to an end, right? The way I like to think about it is that when an attacker is targeting you, right? You have two real motivations for attackers, and I'm not getting into hacktivism side. That's tiny, minor comparatively.
Yeah.
It's really you have financial motivation, you have intelligence motivation, right? So we're talking about our real APT style groups, right?
Yeah.
We're looking at a financial motivation, and those are generally our fin groups. Like again, a Fin 7, and then you look at like again the that intelligence motivation, but it's always about getting data to satisfy a collection goal, right? And I try to put myself in that, and obviously having sat on the other side of the keyboard, fulfilling those gives me that kind of insight and thinking about it from this perspective. But I'm really thinking about, whereas a lot of folks are like, oh man, okay, now we need to think about how would the attacker go and try and gain this particular permission. And I'm like, I'm not thinking about that. I'm trying to think about what's their mission, right? Because if you can start to step back and ask what's their mission, they may not need to elevate, right? In a recent pen test, we were targeting I say pen test, adversary emulation kind of piece. We were told to go target a bunch of retail organizations, and this particular retailer happens to do printing as one of their commercial level printing as one of their things that they do. We fished a bunch of folks, and we're able to consistently across a lot of and this became a big finding. By phishing their managers, their individual store managers, we were able to go and see the document share. Apparently, everybody had inside the particular store had access to the document share for all the stuff that was being printed. The amount of legal documents and all this,
Right.
it was mind blowing, right? Now, again, you kind of step back and you say, okay, well, this is. This is a case where we're not elevating. We're not going to, to domain admin. The adversary emulation. What does the adversary want? Well, if they're financially motivated, they want to go get on, your payment terminals, right? But if they're intelligence motivated, what are they really going after? They're going after intellectual property, or in some cases, your customer's intellectual property, right? And so we kind of talked a lot about it, and really that's kind of where we're kind of spinning back and saying, okay, let's think like the adversary. Let's think about how they target, right?
How is that distinct from, because another phrase which rightly is used a lot in our industry is threat modeling. How is adversary emulation distinct from threat modeling? Is it distinct from threat modeling?
Yeah, I think it is, right? I think it is. So threat modeling, and this is kind of the next piece of the adversary emulation side, is that we're using specific tools and techniques that we know particular adversaries are using, right? So as opposed to like a threat emulation where everything is wide open, right? I can just go. In adversary emulation, let's say that I'm emulating APT28, right? So largely attributed to being Russian GRU, right? So I might then take, basically say, I'm going to use the specific techniques that we know that these individuals are using, right? And I'm not going to use other techniques that we don't know they're using, right? So the idea there being, if I know my organization is being targeted by APT28, I'm going to use the tools and techniques that they're using and go after the types of data that they go after. And so as opposed to being being a threat model, which is really an inside out look. This is an outside in, how are we going to go target the organization look.
So kind of the recent report that we saw from MITRE on against the MITRE attack framework against, I think it was APT 29. That's kind of, they were doing adversary emulation, effectively, if I've understood you correctly. If you're taking, for example, all the tools and tactics of a particular threat group and then running that against your security, or in the case of MITRE, against a bunch of different security products, that's basically adversary emulation, one given situation, one given set of tools and techniques, and seeing how it works out in terms of how does your defense stack up against that. Is that
sure?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's it. And you know, a lot of folks don't do this, we find, because it requires a lot of additional work, right? You know, I have to limit myself in my red team activities, right? I have to limit myself to the tools and techniques that the actors would use. I don't obviously have all of the actor tools. I can't like phone up APT 28 and be like, hey, loan me some malware, bro.
Can I borrow that?
Yeah. Can I borrow your implant, right? Kind of thing. They're not cool with that. It turns out me and the Russians just we're just
don't
not
get
cool.
on.
Not, no, what were the odds, right? I mean, like they're like, no, you're not cool. But no, so you know, there's some development that has to go into this, right? We have to modify our tools to leave specific tool marks to make them look like that. We actually had an adversary emulation exercise or engagement a couple years ago, where you know, suffice it to say that there were a few people at the organization that were in the know, and you know, they didn't follow their escalation paths correctly, and you know, the people in the know found out about it late in the game, but they had actually brought in their incident response retainer, their retained incident response, you know, investigators to look at a piece of the incident. Yeah, for real. And they determined that their incident response, and this is when they really started to gear up, you know, was when they then, you know, pulled in the people in the know, and they're like, man, we have a confirmed, and we got the call as the hey, we have to stop. We have a confirmed incident, right? Like, stop the pen test, or stop the engagement. We have a confirmed
even the people
incident.
that knew that you were on an engagement still hadn't put two and two together, because they called you to say stop.
Yes, because, and this is the key here, because they said, oh yeah, they've looked at this. They're certain it's Chinese APT. It's APT 22, and we're like, oh. That's exactly who we were emulating. You said do Chinese. You know, we have a Chinese threat model, or you know, specifically believed that you know, there was a threat of compromise from from Chinese APT groups. That's who we chose to emulate. Everybody was cool with that, and nobody put that together, right? Even the people in the know, when they were told, you know, nobody then said, oh, is it them, right? Again, the tool marks looked good to the point that incident response provider said, yep, that's them.
So sometimes you're on engagements that rather than emulating a specific group, the field is wide open, right?
Yeah.
People just say, come on in, do whatever you like,
go,
and let us know how far you get, what you get access to, and so on. And that was the kind of engagement, I believe, that led to you creating Dropsmack, which was back when you started the company, right? Around the same time.
Absolutely. No, it was around that. Yeah, it was around that time.
That was a specific tool for a specific purpose at a given point in history. It was 2013, for those who don't know. And Dropsmack was a tool for compromise by misusing the Dropbox service and architecture with a booby-trapped document, effectively, right? Is that still an area of concern for businesses? Because I know that there are now, of course, enterprise offerings that are relatively mature that offer the same kinds of things as the Dropboxes and Google Drives of the world. But I also know that those kinds of services are still widely used by individual employees within an organization. So do you still find a use for tools like that to abuse those kinds of services? And I'm rubbish, I just keep talking. And
you're good.
Have you found that the further, because cloud adoption has increased significantly over those 7 years, right? That further adoption of cloud in all of its many and very glorious different ways has increased the attack surface in any way?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I was actually talking about this on Tuesday, believe it or not, doing yet a different webinar. But on Tuesday, we were actually chatting about this, the browser, right, being kind of the new operating system. Because you talk about, you know, cloud adoption, right? I think that beyond anything else, right, the attack surface definitely is increasing, right? You know, and one of the things we were talking about on, there on Tuesday was the, you know, basically this whole spin of, if I know, let's say that I can't get data from your whatever super secure cloud service, right? You've got all your data. This data that used to be on-prem, as you mentioned, really is moving increasingly into the cloud, right? Salesforce, you've got, QuickBooks, you name it. This, you get tons of financial data out there, tons of lead data, and these in many cases are the crown jewels for organizations. And so,
Sure.
while those services themselves, I'm sure are very secure. There are other services that you're likely using, SaaS platforms within an enterprise that are not, right? And I do think that attackers are going to, start attacking some of those lesser known cloud services, lesser known, lesser secure SaaS services, software as a service, platforms, and use those once they've compromised one of those, use those as the entry vector into the browser, right? The attack, either the browser or the user's machine, and then pivot from there into some of your more secure SaaS services, right? Again, that browser is becoming that OS, right? On the file synchronization side, yeah, that stuff's still wide open, man. It's a tough it's a tough attack surface, right? And every time we open up a service, whether it be a thick client like a Dropbox style service or SaaS use of any SaaS platform, we allow that, we allow everything that goes with that, right? And that offers just awesome opportunities for attackers for command and control, as well as data exfiltration and getting data and tools into the environment. One final thing that I'll mention that a lot of folks don't discuss a lot is that in this shift from on-prem to in the cloud, right? I hear all the time, and by the way, I'm a big fan of realistic security, right? I don't like to play the game of oh my gosh, the sky is falling because of this weird unicorn attack or whatever. Let's be realistic about security here. But, one of the things that I hear a lot of security folks come in and like, the cloud is bad, right? I'm like, the cloud isn't good or bad. It's just different. But one of the things, one of the things I talk to folks about a lot, though, on the IT side, right? Folks will come in and they'll say, it's particularly in bigger organizations we consult with, and they'll say, well, IT has done this study and they show this, the total cost of ownership is going to drop when we move this thing to the cloud, right? And I'm like, yes, TCO is awesome, but I want to put the T in TCO, right? Because T is total, right? And very often when we see these TCO calculations, what they're not counting for is security, right? We've already invested in how to secure our on-prem assets, right? And as we then move that same data to the cloud, two things happen. One, we have to deploy typically additional security controls, right? There are additional security controls. We know complexity is the enemy of security as well. That's another.
And to be honest, a lot of the time you're forcing people to move from the solutions and services and products that they're used to using in their on-prem environment to tools that they're a lot less familiar with in a cloud environment. I think that's one of the things that's driving, to be honest, a lot of vendor consolidation, because otherwise you're forcing multiple user interfaces, multiple management consoles, multiple reporting streams, and you end up with alert fatigue and alert overload and so on.
Sure. But the second thing, and this is something I don't hear a lot of folks talk about, right, is that we can't effectively test these SaaS platforms and the security of these SaaS platforms the way that we test and used to test on-prem, these same on-prem interfaces, right? And so
particularly the multi-tenanted ones, right?
What's that?
Particularly multi-tenanted ones, because then
totally. Like I can't go pen test Salesforce, right? I have to trust that they, if I'm a Salesforce customer, I have to trust they've got security handled, right, on that side. And I'm not saying anything bad about them. I 100% trust them, but mom and pop SaaS, SaaS provider, not so, not so much, right? So there's a lot of there's a loss of transparency. In many cases, there's a loss of logging. We can get some of that back with CASB solutions and whatnot, but it's a brave new world. But to your point, no, none of that's really changed, and additional SaaS options and more stuff in the cloud, I think is just creating more command and control channels than we ever saw before.
And where do you think? So if you're talking about attacks on cloud service, not cloud service providers, SaaS providers, let's say, do you think the risk there is more in attacks on APIs, or do you think it's in traditional kinds of infrastructure and operating system application level attacks, but against those providers, or both?
I mean, I think it's going to be both. I think a lot of it's going to depend on what is your, what's your target, right? if I'm targeting an organization, right? So basically an organization, and I'm going to keep using Salesforce here because it's just it's a good example.
For Salesforce,
so again,
it's not about you. We promise.
Yeah, it's not about you. In fact, we are a Salesforce customer of Rendition. We love Salesforce. Rock on, right? But let's let's take them for instance, right? And say that if I'm targeting an organization that uses Salesforce, I'm really not going to be targeting the API. I want that specific org's data, right? And the quickest way to get there is to get in my browser or a browser of an authorized user there and just suck the data out the same way that I would, right? And so I might do that with an API, right? I might compromise the browser and then issue or create my own API secret, right? And who the heck's looking for that in their account? And you should be reviewing that kind of stuff regularly. But then the attacker then at their leisure uses the API to go suck the data. I don't consider that an attack on the API. That's really an attack on the end user and then using that API. But
that's almost a living off the land attack, right? That's effectively
it feels
off the land without the binaries.
Yep. Do you know, I actually almost used the word, it almost spins right back into lol bins, right? I almost said it and then I was like,
For the benefit of the audience, we were laughing about the expression lol bins just before we went live. It's currently one of my absolute favorite words. Lol bins is just amazing. It should be a new, any artists out there watching who are in our field, that would be a fantastic title for a cartoon strip. In the InfoSec area, you definitely should use that. Have a lol bins cartoon strip.
I love it.
Dilbert or whatever, right? One of the other areas that you work in a lot, and I guess it dovetails totally into the adversary emulation and pen testing stuff that we spoke about, is incident response. The other end of something bad happens. What do you do as an organization? We see the best and the worst of it, I think, in the news, and we see it increasingly with high-level attacks that do garner news coverage. Sometimes they're handled really well. Sometimes they're handled spectacularly badly, and I think we can probably all think of examples of both straight off the top of our heads. You don't have to name names. Feel free if you want to, but you don't have to name names. But what I'm curious about is, what do you think people are increasingly getting right? What are we learning from all of the stuff that's happened before? And what do people continually overlook, get wrong, never quite get their hands around in incident response?
I'm going to start with what they get right, or what we're seeing people get right, I guess, more often, right? I mean, there's by the way, as we say this, know that there is a huge difference between, I say this, between medium to large size organizations and much smaller ones, right?
Yeah.
But I think the thing that we're getting, that we're getting right when it comes to incident response is that in medium to large size organizations, there has been some discussion already that an incident is if not likely, if not inevitable, is likely over the course of some period of time, right? And so there's it is a rare scenario today where I am walking into a boardroom or to discuss with an executive team, and I'm getting the whole, now hold on a second, I thought our stuff was unhackable. I'm not hearing that, right?
Okay.
That's
and you did before?
I did. Oh yeah. There were people that were like, oh my gosh, this, we put it together, it was all secure. I have no idea how this could have happened. We're out of that, right? And in medium to large size organizations, especially, like there is a recognition, and it's not just individually that there's been a recognition at an organizational level. At least there's been some discussion about the fact that, because either one of their peers was hacked or, again, just seeing it, it's constantly in the news. For us, we have a bias, right? Where an availability bias, right? Where we're seeing these stories that are huge in InfoSec, side that really haven't broken out of that InfoSec kind of space, right? And so that's kind of a piece there, but we're seeing more and more executives that are really tracking these breaches, right? And seeing
that stuff kind of goes up to board level now, where it didn't before, right?
One of the things I tell people that are briefing boards, it's like, stop going in with FUD, right? If you've got fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? If you've got 10 minutes to brief the board, 15 minutes to brief the board, do not make the first. I end up doing a lot of like, one-on-ones or dinners, et cetera, kind of after hours stuff with these folks. And I'll tell you that that is the number one complaint that I hear is the stop telling me the problem. It's like, I know the problem, or get granular with it, right? But don't get in there. There are increasing hacking, whatever, 2.4 billion hacking attempts per year. I saw something where somebody posted, very high profile account, I'm gonna leave out who, but just last week, in fact, at one of their virtual, or online conferences, they basically tweeted from one of their presenters where they're like, this ridiculous amount of money lost per minute, right? They're like, per minute, there's X millions of dollars lost to cybercrime. We did the math on it. We're like, that is roughly 18 times the GDP of the planet, right? So where
does all that money come from, and where does it go?
Yeah, exactly. It was somebody in my replies actually hit it the best when they said, man, we could literally offer to pay every potential hacker $1 million a year to not hack. And that would solve cybersecurity. Like if that loss number is true, and we'd still come out phenomenally ahead. And I'm like, you're right. That's how ridiculous some of these numbers are.
You'd just be causing like a denial of service on the hacker registry. That's all. As people trying to sign up for their million, right?
That's exactly it. I mean, me too, right? But on that end, right? So it's the stop the FUD. They don't need to hear that, and that's kind of what we're getting right. The what we're getting wrong is translating that into basically translating that recognition of cybersecurity issues and ultimately how we're going to do incident response is translating that into language that they understand, right? So I regularly hear from boards as well. I'm going to pivot this back, like maybe a little bit less techie and talk, from a board perspective. One of the things we regularly hear from them is they'll say, well, they came in last year and they asked, and this is one of the things I actually do some work with the VCSO and even just advisory services, where they'll say, look, they came to us last year and said we need $1 million or $2 million for this SEM deployment, right? And I thought that was it, and we were done with security, right? And now they're asking for money for security again to deploy this other product, and I don't know, like, why didn't product X take care of take care of that issue that now they need more money for this year, et cetera. And really it's not just about maintenance, right? We're in this constant evolutionary phase, right? CASB wasn't a thing years ago because we didn't need it, right? Now with all of these SaaS deployments, I need CASB. It's not a fringe tool. It is a core tool in a lot of security infrastructures. And so what we're not doing a good job of, right? Whereas you and I know that CASB word, right? And you and I know DLP, and we know what it does, and we know where the limitations of it are. We're not briefing that to boards effectively. And the way to do that, by the way, in my experience, is it's not to go in and be like, you need CASB. Let me explain what CASB is. It's a cloud access service broker. And I mean, you've already put them to sleep, right? They're like back up like 8 steps here, right? What you need to do instead is literally take it scenario based and talk about how each one of these things is a visibility tool, right? Because at the end of the day, execs and boards, board members, they understand the markets, right? And markets are inherently, most of them have business degrees, right? Most of them inherently understand that uncertainty is a thing that does not bode well in business.
Sure.
And so I like to brief my security solutions as decision support tools, right?
This is it's almost adversary emulation again, right? Just in a totally different way.
Well,
you see the board as an adversary and start emulating their way of thinking. What do they want? What do they want to hear about? How do I message that, right?
Target my message. That's exactly it. But on the incident response side, we're doing a bad job of that, and that leads to bad IR outcomes because we haven't looked at where our visibility gaps are, and if we haven't explained those in a way that ultimately our decision makers, our budgetary decision makers, understand, right? And if our budgetary decision makers don't understand the impact of not spending, right, what they're hearing is spend this money or we're going to get hacked. And the reality is they know that everybody else is spending money and they're getting hacked anyway, right? And so when you flip that on its head, they get hacked and they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Now you're going to be able to tell me why we got hacked. And you're like, we don't have the logs. We don't have the actual data, the telemetry in place to be able to see that, right? And they're like, well, time out. We spent a bunch on security. Why don't we have it? What I like to do instead is say, hey, look, here's an incident, right? Here's one that's in the news, right? Insert any of them here. I just saw a big article on Capital One this morning. Let's use them. At the end of it, they're going to ask like, hey, what happened, right? And I want to be able to answer be able to give the best answer possible, right? What I like to do is take one of those scenarios and say, okay, well, here's kind of how this played out. If this happened to us, here are the answers we couldn't provide. Here are the questions I'm not going to be able to answer for you.
You're doing a gap analysis effectively.
That's
right?
it. No, it's 100%. That's actually what we actually call an incident response gap analysis. Yeah, 100%. Yep.
Do you think part of the problem is that there's still a perception of silver bullet solutions?
Oh, there's definitely a lot of that, right? So, silver bullet solutions. Yeah, there's a huge, huge focus on that. In fact, you've actually pivoted right into one of my favorite sayings there when it comes to that stuff. It's that you only need silver bullet solutions if werewolves are in your threat model.
Right.
Right. So yep. So.
Absolutely. There's a question coming from LinkedIn, which I suppose you'll have an opinion on from your adversary emulation side of the business.
Yes.
The question says, what do you think about honeypots? I guess that means, are they effective? Are they worthwhile? Are there different kinds of honeypot? Are there different use cases? Are there times when you never should use one?
Yeah. So I've got a lot of feels about these, right? We've worked incidents that happened because of honeypots, right? And so high interaction honeypots, right? Where folks set up intentionally vulnerable systems. We know we have a lot of churn in Infosec. Bob sets up the honeypot and leaves. And then, of course, did a great pass down, right? A great pass down. So hands that off. And of course, they've, maybe it's feeding alerts to his mailbox or you name it, whatever, right? And then of course nobody's really monitoring this anymore, and attackers just set up residents there because it is an intentionally vulnerable system. I'm not a big fan of those, right? To be straight up, like high interaction, and honestly, a lot of it is really what are your goals, right? I will tell you, I'm a big fan of some of the deception technologies out there, right? We worked an incident recently where they were very, very effective in slowing the attacker down, right? Because the attacker was looking around and interacting with different pieces of this basically this deception technology, right? So they were password spraying these systems that didn't even exist, right? So that was a phenomenal use of that deception tech. And you could call those systems that don't exist, right? They're effectively network layer honeypots, right? And it was, phenomenal, phenomenal use of that. I will mention that, I don't think that honeypots are the first thing you should do in security. Whenever I talk to folks about deception technology, I'm going to step past honeypots because really, I think honeypot is like version 1 of what is a broader deception technology architecture, right? I think deception technology is a useful tool, but I also am very cautious to not deploy it first, right? And the way that I always analogize it to people is think about going to the circus, right? And watching the trapeze artists, right? They typically have a safety net, thankfully, right? But if you put me up on the trapeze, right? And that safety net is not going to do a heck of a lot for me, right? I'm not already skilled in trapeze artistry. If I fall in the safety net, I may break my leg, right? By sticking it through the hole or whatever. I may bounce out of the safety net and fall on the concrete. I am not equipped to use that safety net in any way, shape, or form. There's a foundational use that has to be there first, right? But with these well-trained actors, right? When I already have a good detection portfolio in place, if the attacker happens to slip through that safety net, right, or slip through that detection portfolio, all the training that trapeze artists have, then they fall into the safety net, right? And so I like to think of it in that way. What I am seeing people do today that I think is absolutely the wrong thing to do is they're looking and saying, okay, I'm starting to really build or for the first time have true thoughtful engineering around my whole security stack. I'm going to go deploy deception. And without a real concept of how that's baked into everything else around their security model and their security stack.
What strikes me quite often about honeypots is that they'll be deployed as the high interaction type models that you spoke about, or maybe even something which I guess you would consider low interaction. Maybe you just have a fake user account that no one should ever log into. So as soon as it gets logged into, you have a flag raised. Something as simple as that, right? But what is often neglected around those deployments is that people forget that they need to deploy their security around the honeypot just as effectively as they need to deploy it around the production systems. Otherwise, it's like you're someone who sells gasoline for a living, and your honeypot is basically saying, I'm going to leave a pile of open canisters of gasoline around the back and just see if anyone sets fire to them, because that's very quickly out of control, right? As a honeypot.
Yeah, yeah. Well, then also too, right? It's all about, you know, the high interaction versus, you know, the thing I was talking about before, right? Is the where we had the attacker get slowed down, password spraying systems that didn't exist. This created a ton of noise. It was great from a detection standpoint, right? Created alarms that correlated with other activity that by itself may not have risen up above that noise floor, right? But on the high interaction side, I see a lot of folks where they're like, and you can argue about like, is you know, the point that we've negotiated an SSH session, is that now high interaction or an SMB session? I think until you're actually on the box deploying tools, et cetera, that's really where I go into high interaction, right? Everything before that can be just, you know, network trickery. You know, a lot of folks are like, yeah, there's like this James Bond kind of feel to it. I understand why like the deception technology is so popular, because it's like a lot of the vendors even are pushing where they're like, yeah, it's going to be awesome because you're going to be able to watch what the attacker does, and we're going to push them down this like this maze of fake systems so you can observe all their tools and their techniques and the whole. And I'm here to tell you,
nothing will go wrong.
Yeah. Well, even if it works perfectly, right? I always tell folks to come back and say, hey, first off, is that effective? Can you operationalize that data, right? Because if you can't, then you're spending a bunch of money to what? I mean, look, I'm going to bounce the attacker out of the network anyway once I'm convinced I've got them contained, right? So when I see that those SSH attempts, those SMB attempts inside the network, right? I know I've got an intrusion, or at least I'm working on an incident response. As soon as I'm positive I can contain the attacker, doing a little bit of that investigation, I'm going to bounce them out of my network. I don't need to wait for them to watch or wait and watch, you know, days, hours, whatever of additional activity in this, you know, this virtual environment. Because to your point, one, yeah, that's tough. You know, there is a lot that can go wrong, but even when everything goes right, there are few organizations out there that can truly operationalize that level of data. So.
Speaking of, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. I know that the industry as a whole, when the whole COVID-19 global pandemic hit, and every country was shifting into lockdown mode and work from home mode, there was a lot of marketing sent out from a lot of companies about how to secure your work from home environment, and everyone, and that's, you know, that's not I smiled when I said it, but it's not unjustified that marketing. That was actually a good education opportunity for what we, I suppose, still believe is a pretty good reason. People are in a new architectural situation from an IT and from a security perspective. They're in a new mental situation in terms of working from their home rather than working from the office. There's a whole mental model that goes along with that in terms of access to information, sharing information, use of systems and software, and so on. So we were all, as an industry, and I know that at Rendition you were no different, expecting to see an uptick in attacker activity. Have you?
Yeah, yes and no, right? So from a COVID, you know, from a scammer side of things, sure, absolutely, right? And a lot of the scams, honestly, have gotten better over the last several years, right? I was actually, you know, had a client who misunderstood, you know, what we mean by an advanced attack, right? And they were like, this one's super advanced, and it was advanced because, you know, they had basically like added their domain, right? The victim's domain to like the credential harvesting page. I'm like, brother, that's not advanced, right? Like I can show you advanced, right? But like this is that's like the you must be this tall to ride. And like, well, we train all of our users to look for grammatical errors, and you know, like they got all the spelling right. They even had our domain name on the website and the whole. I'm like, yeah, again, I'm like, that's the you must be this tall to ride. And if that level is causing problems, let me show you some stuff that's really going to blow your mind, kind of thing. So on the low end of things, I mean, we saw a huge attacker uptick, right? But on the advanced, like the APT style threats, you know, we saw a little bit of a drop off in that for a while. It's definitely picked back up. But you know, we had whole countries that were in lockdown, right? You know, if you picture, again, I talk about from the, you know, APT style side being really an intelligence kind of operation. You know, this isn't like something you send somebody home, an intelligence operator, and be like, go hack from home, right? Kind of thing. If they're at home, they're probably not doing as much of this, right? I don't for a minute believe any country completely shut down around that, but I do believe that there were several that had reduced operations, and certainly some of your contractors that do that kind of work, I suspect, weren't in the offices. And anyway, so we did see a drop off. It's really picked back up. We saw, it was kind of interesting, right? So at the same time that we saw kind of a lull, a little bit of a lull in some of our APT operations, we saw the scams just go through the roof, right?
Sure.
So there was never a spot where it was down. What I am seeing a difference in, and this is across my non-monitor clients, right? So the fact that we're on a SOC gives us a good kind of feel for what's out there, at least across those those industries that we monitor. But we're not seeing as many reported intrusions, and I think that's a really interesting piece there. And I've got some theories around that, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's tough to say. We're starting to see those start to pick back up, but for that initial work from home piece, we saw kind of a dip in reported, externally reported intrusions.
And you never know, right? If that's good or bad. Seeing a dip in reported intrusions, does that mean people, the intrusions aren't happening, or does it mean that people are not as vigilant as they were when they were working from the office, or does it mean that the attacks got better? We had a conversation a couple of days ago. You and I had a conversation where you raised a really interesting point about what has become known as dwell time. And you had a really interesting, as a result of the COVID-19 situation, you had a really interesting prediction around that. You want to share that?
Yeah, definitely. And I have to credit Brandon McCrillis, who's the another former Intel guy, CEO of Rendition. He's actually the one who really pitched this first. But we originally thought that as we moved to that work from home, we're like, look, folks are losing some of the perimeter defenses, right, that they used to have as they move these home. It's a changed environment. It's new complexity. It's we thought that we'd see a big spike then, followed by a somewhat larger spike as we transition back to the office and we get all the monitoring back in place. But dwell time, we know from various reports that there are 60, 90, 120 days, 180, whatever it is, the time between when an attacker compromises a network or an asset and the time that they're detected, right? And we know that there's a span of time. It's not immediate. We're really sitting in that, that 90 days out of work, right? Is a fact, or out of the office is kind of where we're at, 60 to 90 days, depending on where you're at. Some folks are moving back into the office, et cetera, right? And so, I think that we're going to see a real spike coming, as that kind of dwell time, wears, I don't want to say wears off, right? But as we hit that dwell time, right? Because assuming that, and I'll even throw another kind of theory up here, it's something we talk a lot about, internally at Rendition, but as we move to home, we already had a lot of distractions around home, and that includes our security staff, right? So the security staff lost a lot of their monitoring capabilities, right? As we expanded the perimeter just like overnight and tried to adapt there. We have new insider threat risks as people have laid off or been laid off, right? Of a lot of, it's just a reality in a lot of organizations.
Employees,
That's it, right? Disgruntled. And even if you don't, count the insider threat there, terminating / temporarily, suspending these accounts, et cetera. I have no doubt that in some organizations there were those that were missed, right? And those then create additional opportunities for attackers, right? And so I think that we're seeing, I think that there's a lot in what we're not seeing. And I think that probably in the fall or rolling into August, September, I think we're going to see a real big peak of reported incidents that occurred in April and May.
So you think maybe in the next, for example, Verizon data breach report, would you put money on the dwell time having increased?
I wouldn't necessarily put money there for the DBIR, but only because of selection bias. Right.
Okay.
There's a selection bias there in the DBIR, and this isn't to knock the DBIR. It's a fantastic report. Read it. Yeah, sure. You absolutely should. But then also understand where the data comes from. Right. It comes from Verizon, and it comes from people and firms that feed data to Verizon. And so what you're looking at here are basically a cross section of specific incidents. And again, there's a selection bias there for that, right? I tend to think those are a little bit the higher end. They're the folks that would have been more likely to
Yeah, I think
more
you're right.
likely to have more coordinated security strategies, right? But I think some of your smaller, medium enterprises, right? So let's sit in that 3,000 to 5,000 user type base. That's folks that generally aren't represented in the DBIR, I'd say, and I think that's where you're going to see that big uptick, right? Where we really lost some of that monitoring. Yeah.
So let's switch gears a bit. When I tweeted
Yeah.
earlier on, I think when there was an hour to go until we were due to start, and I was encouraging people to come and listen, I said, we're not only going to talk tech, because there are some other really interesting areas that we could talk about. They're related, but they're not directly about tools, technologies, adversary emulation, incident response. You were the defense expert for Marcus Hutchins recently. And for the benefit of the audience, I know I'm okay with talking to Jake about this. Don't worry, I'm not springing it on him. You were the defense expert for Marcus Hutchins. A very high profile case, lots of media coverage, and everybody had an opinion. You were on the inside. You have a much more qualified opinion than most people out there. So what's your take on that whole situation? Like a bird's eye view.
So first off, let me say that I obviously can't talk about the stuff that was, that's non-public in the case, right? So we'll kind of kick there, but that stuff does obviously inform my opinions. First off, he was Marcus, as I think a lot of folks know, was charged, under a number of different statutes for allegedly writing and then ultimately selling malware. And so I think there's a couple of really interesting points there. First off, when they originally arrested Marcus, he thought it was related to WannaCry. There's been a lot of, he's the gentleman that, thankfully in his work, created the WannaCry or registered the WannaCry kill switch domain.
I should have prefaced with that. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, no, but I think it's an important thing to know because, and this is public, Marcy Wheeler, et cetera, reported on this. They, when he was originally being questioned, believed that that's what they were talking to him about. Right. And it wasn't until he had made some, let's say, statements against interest, I think is the way that the lawyers present those, did he learn that it wasn't about that? I think the first, probably the first thing to kind of chat about there is, a lawyer friend of mine said it the best. It's basically if you are called to speak or law enforcement approaches you to talk to them about anything, it's STFU. Shut the heck up, right? And call a lawyer, right? My family is big in law enforcement. It's mostly a military and law enforcement family. My stepdad has routinely said, you never talk. He said, you never, if the police are there to talk to you, or the FBI or whoever's the FBI in this case, he said, you never talk your way out of trouble. He said, people regularly talk their way into trouble. So when somebody comes to you and says, hey, we just want to clear up a couple of things, let's chat about this. Shut up, right? Say, am I being detained, right? Get a lawyer. They will then help you with that stuff, right? So I think that's one thing that's huge there. But I want to step back for another piece here and just kind of on the government side. They charged Marcus under the both the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act and the Wiretap Act. And this was a really interesting case. It's one of the reasons I got involved with it. The work was pro bono, and so was legal work for that matter. I mean, he had a legal defense fund, but I mean, the work was largely pro bono. They covered
it was ongoing for a long time, right?
Yeah, so. It was. Yeah, they basically covered like councils, flights to Michigan to basically, I think it was Michigan, no, Wisconsin, excuse me, Wisconsin to hear the case. There was a lot around that, but again, when the government charged on the Wiretap Act, that was an attempt to really to go set precedent, right? The Wiretap Act talks about creating hardware and software for the basically for wiretapping activities, and what they were trying to allude to was the fact that by creating malware that was able to inject itself into the browser and sniff communications, that itself was a violation of the Wiretap Act, and what we have then is this expansion of government, government tools, right, to be able to charge folks with, and to say that a single crime is or a single act, right, building and selling this malware is a violation of multiple different statutes, right? And so, again, that's problematic to me. It's troublesome to me. There's a lot of other troublesome stuff about the case, but anyway, yeah.
And if there were one, maybe isn't a fair question, and if it's not a fair question, just tell me it's not, and we'll move on. But if there were one lesson other than shut the hell up, if there were one lesson that you would say we could draw from this whole case, how it was handled, what the ultimate verdict was, or what the activities were that led to the charges being brought, from any aspect of it, if there were one really important lesson that we could draw from that, what do you think that would be?
I think, really, if there's, and I'm going to go societal here, because I don't want to get on the, but I think that the societal lesson is that, underrepresented folks don't stand a chance. Especially the digital evidence, right? I say don't stand a chance, but you are severely hampered with the lack of good help there, right? And I credit Marsha Hoffman and Brian Klein did outstanding did outstanding work on this case. And the reason largely that malware tech Marcus Hutchins is not in basically got the sentence that he did, which is effectively time served in the U.S. Which again I think is a fully fair verdict given all the circumstances of the case. When I look at that, they had to convince a 70-year-old judge. They had to explain what was going on to the 70-year-old judge. And by the way, part of the sentencing decision that allowed, because there were sentencing brackets once he pled guilty, right? There are sentencing brackets that largely have to do with damages, right? And so the way that he was able to get time served was to move the damages the government claimed down to an actual real number, right? Okay. And so that had to then, because again, even as we go into sentencing, there's high damages being claimed. Marsha and Brian did outstanding. I mean, just phenomenal work, right? Convincing the judge of that, right? And again, I played a very small role there, working through some of the claims and saying, okay, look, that's garbage. Here's why it's garbage, right? And then very importantly, here's how to analogize this. Here's how to take this techie thing. Yeah. Right, that we're trying to explain to a 70-year-old judge. Marsha, again, used to work at the EFF, counsel at the EFF. She knows the tech. She's one of the smartest tech lawyers I've ever met. Brian, again, super smart tech guy. He does a lot of, very, very, very technically focused. The judge, not so much. Right, again, we're talking about a 70-year-old judge.
To make that stuff comprehensible to someone who has nothing to do with this area of life, technology, the world.
Right. Yeah. Because while we'd like to think that our jurists are not, not biased, let's be real about this, right? If you've got, random lawyer standing up on one side saying this is wrong, and you've got the FBI saying, no, this is right, and it's all gobbledygook to them, right? And they can't make a judgment. They are probably going to side with the FBI, and I understand that, right? Yeah. Heck, I'm not a judge. I'd probably do the same thing, right? So we have to break that tech into something and analogize that tech into something they can understand. And I think that from a societal standpoint, I don't have a fix for this, by the way, but if he hadn't had good representation, right? From the lawyer side, obviously lawyers that understand tech, and then experts that can help translate that and fight some of these claims. I think that turns out very differently. And I really hate to think about the folks that are sitting in prison today, for various crimes where digital evidence is playing a role, right? We all carry one of these, right? And so, digital evidence is playing a role in a lot of cases that are not that we don't think of as related, cybercrime or whatever related. Yeah. And again, we see cases regularly where folks are just railroaded, and it's with digital evidence, and we're like, man, that analysis is garbage, right? There's all kinds of holes to poke in it, but they just don't have that representation. So
I'm going to pivot back, because I need to give time to people who are actually asking questions from online, because that's why we're here.
Yeah, of course.
We're still talking about crimes and tools and technology. The question basically alludes to the fact that it's always a race between attacker and defender. Defending technologies are being improved all the time. We were speaking about honeypots. The question relates to that, but I think it relates to all defensive technologies. Are they being outpaced by attackers? or the other way around, or is it kind of neck and neck? What's your feeling from an IR and incident investigation perspective?
Attackers will always outpace us, right? They'll always outpace us, and it's not because they're smarter; it's because of business, right? I am not going to spend I'm not going to spend a lot on controls to stop. We've already seen to stop attacks that we don't have to, right? We've already seen academic implementations of operating systems that I don't want to call them exploit proof. I don't think anything is, right? But things that ultimately, heck, there's shadow stacks, a great example. Or Microsoft is looking into this now. The original shadow stacks paper, I think, was written in 2000 or 2001. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking at this almost 20-year gap, right, between, and probably by the time it's implemented, will be at least 20 plus years. But these largely kill stack-based buffer overflows. Like without additional information disclosure and heap overwrites and the whole, stack-based buffer overflows are dead. Why haven't we been using these? And the answer is, man, they slow computing down a lot, right? And so we then have to decide, right, make these decisions around is the cure worse than the disease, right? And so while if you go into the academic literature, the defense is outpacing the offense ridiculously. If you turn around to business, you see offense outpacing defense. And I think it's always going to be that way. I think as those innovations, right, we're not going to work to operationalize a lot of these academic type solutions, right? Until even though they've been shown to be effective, the state that they're in, and in some cases, just even the theory, right? The cure is worse than the disease. The disease has to be at least as bad as the cure, and then we'll start to see that shift. But I think it'll always be. I think we'll always be playing catch up in the business world.
Yeah, my take on it was always that as defenders, and I agree that the attackers will always outpace the defenders. And for me, an important part of that is that as defenders, we have to play effectively with an open hand. Our tools, our technologies, what we do business for, how we do business, all of the OSINT that's available about us, our organizations, and everything else, and not to mention the security tools that we use, is out there, and that's the way the world works. If you're on the offensive side, that's not the case. You don't have to follow the rules. You don't have to publicize what you do. You don't have to QA your tools. You have to make sure they work to a certain extent, but you don't have to worry about, oh my word, am I going to get a lot of tech support calls if I go public with, maybe still got this bug. So you can iterate really fast, you can innovate, you can break the rules, you don't have to conform to RFCs. There's a whole lot of stuff you don't have to do. Right. So that kind of open hand, closed hand thing, I think plays a big role as well. We're coming up really close to the hour, but there was one more thing that I wanted to talk to you about, because I tweeted something a couple of days ago. I think it was the day before yesterday. I was surprised by the strength of feeling of the responses that I got. Mostly on a side that didn't agree with me. And I was really interested in your take on it. My original tweet just asked, hey, can I crowdsource a list of racist terms that we use in IT, or specifically in information security? And the terms that I had in mind were things like blacklist, whitelist, and master slave, when we're talking about configurations of servers, for example. I passionately believe that there's the trope that black equals bad and white equals good. No matter the etymology of the word concerned, that's actually irrelevant. But the fact that we characterize bad things as being black, like the blacklist and the black sheep and lots of other examples, and good things as being white, reflects the racist society that we're all a part of. And whatever we can do to change that is only to the good. I got a lot of response from people who, for some reason that honestly I don't understand, were extremely resistant to, why the heck should we make those changes? That's ridiculous. They're not racist terms. They're not meant in a racist way. What's your take on that? Am I alone? Am I stupid?
No, I don't think so, right? I really analogize this to the circle game, and I know I'm going to get a couple of haters after this, right? But you probably are familiar with the circle game, right? Where it's like it's the sign that's been co-opted by a lot of these white power groups, right? And then people come back and they're like, yeah, but that all started on 4chan, and I'm like, neat. right? It started on 4chan. I don't really care at the end of the day. What the reality is, it's a sign that's been co-opted by hate groups, right? And obviously then it is exclusionary, and it's hurting, the use of it is hurting some people. And so even if I derive joy from or have nostalgic thoughts about playing the circle game, I don't, but whatever. If even if I did, I don't think it's worth offending somebody over a choice of what I choose to play, and then pivoting back into what you're talking about, what I choose to say, right?
Yeah.
And I actually agree with you. I think wholeheartedly here, right? Yes, there are a number of terms that are, I think, either overtly, that are in our vernacular, right? That are either overtly racist or certainly have some racist undertones. And I think where possible, yeah, we should absolutely be shifting those. There's no reason to, if it's offending people, right? Then, if a particular term is offending people and we can communicate the same methodology, right? By not doing that, I think that's it's a good way to play.
Why would you not change it, right?
Yeah, why would you not change it, right? I mean, it's one of those, like when I talk to somebody, like I've transitioned from blacklist to blocklist, right? And if somebody comes to me, I've had people question me on this, and well, that's not offending anybody. I'm like, first off, I've talked to people who are like, that term puts me off, right? I'm like, done. Then if I can avoid that, I unfortunately don't have a good term for whitelist, right? I don't have one that rolls off the tongue as easily for that, but I definitely am stopping using the word blacklist. I'm transitioning to the block list. But it's master slave, it's primary and secondary. I understand why we use those terms originally. It wasn't to throw racism into tech. It was we were creating analogies. Now I'm back to my whole analogy thing, but analogies, things people already understood, right? But if those terms themselves are hurtful, right, and we now have a better societal consciousness around that, we should absolutely change those, and we can do that without a huge loss of fidelity. I don't understand. I struggle to understand when people say, no, I'm sticking with that term, and it's like,
people have told you it hurts. What are you doing?
Yeah, like what's your end game here, right? Like, where do you think you win on this? Yeah, it's mind blowing to me. Yeah.
Thank you, Jake, for the reality check. Thank you for being willing to answer that question. Thank you for being willing to answer all of my questions and the questions that we got live as we went along. You've been an incredible guest. I couldn't have picked anyone better to end my first ever season of attempting to do live broadcasts online. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Jake, it's been an absolute pleasure. I hope we can do this again.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me on, Rik. Really appreciate it.
Cheers. That's it. I feel kind of sad. That's the end of the first season of Let's Talk Security. I've got to tell you, before episode 1, I was really nervous, and although I spend a lot of my time standing in front of large numbers of people speaking live in the room, I find that a lot less terrifying because I can see the reaction of the people watching than when all I can see is effectively the lens of my camera right there. The feedback about what we've done with this first season has been really positive. I just want to take the opportunity to thank you all again for watching the show, for sticking with us. I want to thank all of the guests that have joined me this first season. Hopefully I picked a very a group with very diverse skills and worldviews. I'm going to try and continue and expand on that theme of diversity in the second season. If you're interested in coming on and having a conversation with me in season 2, whenever that is, please just hit me up on Twitter, drop me a line, say, hey, I'd love to come and talk, and we'll sort something out. Doing this show, like I said, has been terrifying. It's been rewarding, and it's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you all very much for watching. See you in season 2. And I'll just leave you with the final traditional, I'm Ron Burgundy.